June 17, 1944, Normandy, France. Grid reference 7.2 kilometers southwest of Carentan. The guns were loaded. 6 M114 Infantry 5-Bollenderb howitzers sat in a shallow depression behind an embankment of earth and crushed hedgerow. The crews stood at their stations. Powder bags had been staged. Breech blocks were open. Aiming stakes had been driven into the ground at 130 hours. Before first light, the Fire Direction Center had calculated deflection and elevation. The forward observer had sent coordinates by radio at 103:12 hours. The battalion commander had approved the fire mission at 103:14 hours. The executive officer had given the fire command at 03:16 hours. It was now 03:11 hours. No one spoke. The only sound was breathing and the faint rustle of canvas against wool. Primer tubes were inserted. Lanyards were taut. 6 gunners stood with their hands ready. The battery commander stood behind the 3rd gun, eyes on his watch. His hand was raised. The infantry had already crossed the line of departure. The battery had displaced during the night from a position near Saint-C. Mont. Movement had been slow due to mud and narrow farm roads. By 0100 hours, the guns were emplaced in a field bordered by thick hedgerows typical of the bocage. The position offered concealment but limited observation. A single farmhouse stood 200 meters to the north, abandoned. The ground sloped gently downward to the east, where the target area lay. The target was a German defensive position approximately 800 meters distant. Intelligence reports indicated a reinforced platoon occupying a fortified farmstead with dugouts, trenches, and at least 2 MG-42 machine guns. The position commanded a crossroads and overlooked open ground that the American infantry would need to traverse. Division had assigned the 2nd Battalion, 327th Infantry Regiment to clear the position as part of a broader push towards St. L. The artillery preparation was standard. 20 rounds per gun, high explosive, fired over a 6-minute period. The barrage would begin 3 minutes before the infantry assault. Smoke rounds would follow to obscure German observation. The plan had been coordinated the previous evening. Radio checks had been completed. All communication links were functional. At 03:02 hours, the forward observer reported that the infantry companies were moving into their assembly areas. At 03:12 hours, he confirmed they had begun their advance. The fire mission was issued immediately. Time of flight for the shells would be approximately 30 seconds. The first rounds were expected to land at 03:19 hours. The infantry would reach the assault line at 03:25 hours. Field artillery doctrine in 1944 was explicit. The primary role of artillery was to suppress or destroy enemy positions before friendly infantry made contact. The purpose was to reduce casualties. Without preparatory fire, infantry advancing across open ground against fortified positions could expect losses exceeding 30%. With effective artillery support, losses could be reduced to 10% or less. This was not theory. It was derived from casualty data collected across multiple theaters since 1942. Gun crews had trained for this mission repeatedly. The sequence was automatic. On command, the lanyard would be pulled. The firing pin would strike the primer. The propellant charge would ignite. The shell would exit the barrel at approximately 560 meters per second. The crew would reload within 45 seconds. The process would repeat until the fire mission was complete. Crew members did not make decisions about whether to fire. They executed commands. The forward observer had visual contact with the target area. His role was to adjust fire if the initial rounds missed. He carried binoculars, a radio, maps, and a compass. He had been trained to calculate corrections for wind, air density, and powder temperature. His reports were concise and factual. He had served in North Africa and Sicily. He knew what happened to infantry without fire support. The battery commander had commanded this unit since March. He had overseen 187 fire missions since landing in Normandy on June 7. Most missions were executed without incident. 3 had been cancelled due to weather. 1 had been halted due to a misidentified target. None had been stopped after the command to fire had been given. The infantry were already moving. At 03:18 hours and 20 seconds, a second radio transmission was received. The battery commander lowered his hand. He did not speak. He did not turn. He stood motionless, facing the guns. The crews remained at their stations. Lanyards stayed taut. Breech blocks remained open. No one moved. The transmission had lasted 4 seconds. The content was not repeated over the command net. 30 seconds passed. 1 minute. The guns did not fire. The infantry continued to advance. At 03:99 hours, the executive officer approached the battery commander. He did not salute. He spoke quietly. The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. The executive officer returned to his position near the fire direction center. He did not issue any orders. The gun crews remained in place. Several men glanced toward the battery commander. No one asked questions. At 03:20 hours, the forward observer transmitted a request for confirmation. His voice was level. He reported that the infantry were 400 meters from the objective. He requested immediate fire. The transmission was acknowledged by the Fire Direction Center. No response was sent. At 03:21 hours, the first sergeant moved along the gun line. He checked each position, but did not speak to the crews. Several men shifted their weight. One adjusted his grip on the lanyard. Another glanced at the battery commander, then back at the gun. The field was silent except for distant engine noise from the east. At 03:22 hours, the forward observer transmitted again. He reported that the infantry were 300 meters from the objective. He stated that they were visible to the enemy position. He requested fire. The Fire Direction Center acknowledged. No orders were given. At 03:23 hours, the executive officer returned to the battery commander. The 2 men stood together for several seconds. Neither gestured. The executive officer walked back to the Fire Direction Center. He picked up the radio handset, then set it down without transmitting. At 03:24 hours, the forward observer reported that the infantry were 200 meters from the objective. He did not request fire. His transmission ended. The radio net went quiet. The guns remained loaded and aimed. The crews did not stand down. The second radio transmission at 03:10 hours had come from the battalion operations officer. It contained updated intelligence from a reconnaissance patrol that had returned to friendly lines 20 minutes earlier. The patrol had observed the target farmstead from a concealed position 600 meters to the south. Their report indicated no activity at the site. No movement had been detected. No smoke from cooking fires. No visible sentries. The trenches appeared empty. The patrol leader assessed that the position had been abandoned sometime during the previous night. He could not confirm whether German forces had withdrawn or redeployed. He noted that equipment and obstacles remained in place, suggesting a hasty departure. The information had been relayed to battalion at 0258 hours, then forwarded to the artillery liaison officer at 0310 hours. The liaison officer had immediately contacted the battery. The timing created a problem. The infantry had already begun their movement. Standard procedure would have been to halt the assault, verify the intelligence, and reassess the target. However, stopping an infantry advance after it had begun required clear communication across multiple company and platoon commanders. Radio traffic was restricted due to operational security. Runners would take too long. The decision was made to allow the infantry to continue while withholding the artillery fire. The risk was calculable. If the intelligence was accurate and the position was abandoned, firing the barrage would waste ammunition and reveal the artillery position to German observers. If the intelligence was inaccurate and the position was still occupied, the infantry would make contact without fire support. The battalion operations officer assessed that the patrol's report was reliable. The battery commander accepted the assessment. No formal order was issued to cancel the fire mission. The battery commander simply did not give the command to fire. At 0327 hours, the forward observer reported that the infantry had reached the objective without contact. He confirmed that the position was unoccupied. German forces had withdrawn. Defensive structures were intact but unmanned. Equipment had been removed. No casualties were sustained during the approach. At 0329 hours, the battery commander ordered the guns to be cleared and secured. Breech blocks were closed. Powder bags were returned to storage. Lanyards were coiled. The crews moved through the sequence without conversation. Several men glanced toward the battery commander, but no one spoke. At 0335 hours, the battalion operations officer transmitted new fire missions to support the continued advance. The battery prepared to displace forward to maintain range. Aiming stakes were pulled. Trails were hitched to prime movers. The position was vacated by 0410 hours. The forward observer remained with the lead infantry company. At 0345 hours, he reported encountering scattered resistance, fuzz 200 meters beyond the original objective. He requested fire support. The battery, now in movement, was unable to respond. A different artillery unit provided coverage. The engagement lasted 14 minutes. By 0800 hours, the battery had established a new firing position 2 kilometers to the east. Guns were emplaced and registered. The crew began preparing ammunition for subsequent missions. The events at the previous position were not discussed. No after-action report mentioned the withheld fire mission. The infantry continued their advance throughout the day. By 1600 hours, they had secured 3 additional objectives and taken 18 prisoners. Casualties for the day totaled 4 wounded, none serious. The battalion reported the day's operations as successful. No commendation was issued to the battery commander. No notation appeared in the unit's daily journal regarding the decision to withhold fire. The fire mission log recorded only that the mission was canceled due to updated intelligence. The forward observer's after-action report did not reference the incident. The battalion operations officer's summary mentioned the reconnaissance patrol's findings, but did not connect them to the artillery mission. Standard reporting procedures required documentation of all fire missions, including those canceled or adjusted. The record submitted for June 17, 1944, listed 7 fire missions conducted by the battery. The mission targeting the farmstead was included in the count, but marked as not executed. Target verification. No further explanation was provided. The reconnaissance patrol leader was reassigned to a different unit on June 20. He was killed in action near PA Rears on July 11, 1944. His patrol report was filed with battalion records, but not forwarded to higher command. The document was lost when division headquarters displaced during heavy fighting in late June. The infantry company that had advanced on the farmstead was engaged in continuous operations for the next 16 days. Of the officers present during the June 17 assault, 2 were wounded on June 22 and evacuated. The company commander was killed on June 29. No surviving personnel later mentioned the abandoned German position in interviews or memoirs. The battery commander remained with the unit through the end of the Normandy campaign. He was promoted to major in August 1944. He was transferred to a training command in England in October. He did not discuss the incident in any known correspondence or official report. After the war, the battery commander returned to civilian life. He worked as an engineer in Pennsylvania. He did not attend unit reunions. He responded to one letter from a former subordinate in 1953, but declined to discuss specific operations. He died in 1971. His service records were archived with the National Personnel Records Center. The forward observer remained in the Army after the war. He served in Korea and retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1963. In a 1958 interview conducted for an internal Army study on fire support coordination, he was asked about instances where fire missions were adjusted or canceled based on last-minute intelligence. He mentioned several examples but did not specifically reference the June 17, 1944 mission. The interview transcript was declassified in 1992. The executive officer was wounded in July 1944 and returned to the United States. He left the service in 1946. He worked in insurance in Ohio in 1968. He contributed a brief written account of his service to a local historical society. The account mentioned the Normandy campaign, but focused on logistical challenges. He made no reference to individual fire missions. Of the gun crews present on June 17, 1944, 3 men were killed in action before the end of the war. 4 were wounded. The remainder were discharged between late 1945 and early 1946. None produced memoirs or detailed accounts of their service. 2 participated in oral history projects in the 1980s. Neither mentioned the incident. The German unit that had occupied the farmstead was identified post-war as part of the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division. Records indicated the unit withdrew from the position during the night of June 16 to 17 due to concerns about encirclement. The withdrawal was conducted under orders from regimental command. No German records reference American artillery or infantry activity in the area during the withdrawal. The guns were loaded, aimed, and ready. The coordinates were correct. The mission had been approved. The crews were trained. The conditions were adequate. The target was identified. The infantry had already begun to move. At 03:18 hours, the information changed. At 03:20 hours and 20 seconds, a decision was required. The decision was made by withholding a command. The guns did not fire. The infantry reached the objective. No shots were exchanged. By 0410 hours, the battery had displaced. By 0800 hours, new missions were assigned. By evening, the day's operations were complete. The event occupied less than 12 minutes. It left no physical evidence. It altered no maps. It generated no reports that survived the war. The crews returned to their duties. The infantry continued to advance. The war continued. The silence at Zoar 3 waning hours was not recorded.